It's all yours, Dawn.
Hey,
Thank
thank you so much. And I've got my cat Kenzie right above me. You'll see here too. He just joined us. So thank you for inviting me this evening. When I was asked about sharing with you tonight, I was really pleased to see that the title of the talk was Finding Faith and not definitively found faith. And as I share with you tonight, I hope that wherever we are on our journeys, that we can recognize that finding faith is a lifelong process. It's beautifully complex, it's nonlinear, and it's as individual as each person on this call tonight. I'm sharing from my perspective as a Christian who appreciates and borrows from Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, and whatever recovery oriented practices and readings that complement my beliefs and guide my daily walk with my higher power, who I call God. So, along with that, I'm also sharing as the parent of a 23-year-old who is in long term recovery from substance use disorder. He entered Caron, Pennsylvania as a treatment resistant 16-year-old in January of 2018. And to my knowledge, he hasn't used any mind altering substances in nearly 6 years. And he is currently living in South Florida. Been working full time since 2020 at a residential program for adolescent boys with substance use and mental health disabilities. And he's completing his bachelor's degree in business. And I am grateful beyond words for the hard work that my son eventually put in, for the Caron parents who have shared this fellowship of suffering and hope with me, and for the Caron professionals and parents who have been wise shepherds for me all along the way. So, back 7 years ago today, my world was totally falling apart. My youngest of three children, at age 16, was turning into a person I did not know. Over the previous summer, I later learned he had spent pretty much every day smoking weed with his friends, frequently at our home, while my husband and I, along with his college-aged siblings, were all out at work. He also got his first job, bussing tables at a restaurant, where he was exposed to even greater access to a wide variety of substances that I still can't even fathom. And meanwhile, on the home front, legally prescribed benzos and opioids were plentiful at both our home and his grandparents'. And I later learned they were his favorites. So, to top it all off, just coming into vogue were vapes. At that time, these were unknown devices to nerd parents like myself. And it would be another year before hysterical news articles about teen vaping hit the press, well past serving any usefulness to me or my family. I'd go through my house on scavenger hunts, finding empty bottles and paraphernalia that I couldn't identify. And I have an especially fond memory of confronting him and seizing his vape one day after school, and then heading outside to my yard so that I'd have the protection of public exposure should he hit me and I'd need to call 911. And on a side note, he never hit me, even at his worst. The first time he landed in the pediatric ER for an overdose, which was Sunday, October 15th, 2017, we were there for 3 nights before a pediatric psych bed anywhere in the DC Baltimore region became available. By then, however, he was sober enough to claim his overdose was due to just wanting to get high, putting on enough bravado to fool the doctors into believing that his problem was drugs, which in his mind was cool, not the underlying anxiety and depression that I knew and told doctors were there, and that didn't get addressed until a year and a half later, when 2 days after his 18th birthday, we landed on the steps of Caron Renaissance. There's a whole lot more to the in-between of this story, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. But for now, I want to focus on my lane, which I learned is the only place where I could drive safely through this process. At my first Care and Parent group meeting, I learned the alternate version of the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. In my lane, I had to learn boundaries. I had to preserve time that I needed to sleep, to work, to exercise, and to practice other forms of self-care. I needed to learn to say no when my son tried to convince me that he needed to come home, and I knew that if he came home, he'd probably die. In my lane, I had to go through the grief process. I had to let go of dreams that I had around my son finishing high school, going to prom, heading off to college. In my lane, I had to accept what was and learn to deal with it. For anyone who's worked the 12 steps, which I highly recommend, you might recognize this as that ugly and beautifully necessary step 1, a place of existential humility. This is the place where you have to confront the notion of it couldn't happen to me. If I had any notion before all of this that I could judge anyone else's parenting journey, it went out the window. I came from a place of faith in God, for which I'm grateful. And yet, I still needed to find faith. My family was broken, and I'd never seen anything as close to the biblical notion of demonic possession in my life as my son on drugs. Yet, when my son said, "I don't believe in God," I responded that was okay, because I knew that God believed in him, and that was far more important. I prayed with almost every breath, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." I learned, like the ancient Hebrews driven out of Jerusalem to Babylon, that God is with me in exile. And that's what that process felt like a lot. I learned the importance of the word "and." Like in parenting, holding on and letting go are both expressions of love. For me, this was a key to understanding the recovery phrase, from fear to faith. When I held to my higher power, knowing that this love held my son beyond anything I could ever imagine, I could let go and let God. Finally, I committed myself, especially at Care and Renaissance. If any of you have been through that process, you know what I'm talking about, to speaking the truth in love, because there's a lot of speaking truth there. At the bottom of all this, I discovered that only love is strong enough to break the bonds of addiction. That my being a loving mirror was the strongest stance I could take to combat the darkness that threatened my son, my family, and my life. Now, as I write all of this, it seems so clean being able to put it down on words, but it's not. And I want to just share with you a few things that I found really helpful, practices that I've found very helpful along the way. I became an avid journaler. I spend about at least a half hour every morning on my couch. I light a candle. My pets are usually gathered with me, so it's kind of my little Eden. And we read. There are so many great resources out there, from spiritual traditions to amazing recovery oriented readings. Melody Beatty, of course, comes to mind. Sandy Swenson, Richard Rohr, Breathing Underwater, some of my favorites. I also want to share with you, before all of this process, and I keep my journals. These were my journals before 2017. Since fall 2017, oh my gosh, I can't even pick them up. These plus my 12-step workbook. It's, you're lucky I only learned about this a couple hours ago, because I probably would have gone through and read through all of this and had way too much to share. But I have found that incredibly helpful. Also, now I've lost my notes. Gratitude. I'm so thankful that Christina opened up with gratitude. I keep on my phone, I keep an app. It's I'm just going to put a plug. It's called Day One Journal, and every night before bed, I list 5 things for the day that I'm grateful for. And I try to it also allows you to import photos from that day if you have any. And it's so cool to be able to, at the end of the day, go back and see things that happened 7 years ago, and like see where you are today and see the growth. And that's that whole, from, finding faith and hope, to be able to see that process is really beautiful. Finding physical ways of taking care of yourself. I personally practice yoga, love it, running, whatever it is that helps you feel strong and healthy. I highly recommend that. I consider that a spiritual practice, is keeping yourself healthy. And finally, I just also want to just underscore what you all are doing tonight. And we all have found so much value in finding community. And honestly, we all have a variety of different communities in our life. I don't go to my Caring Parent meetings regularly anymore. I just don't have the time. I've got 2 octogenarian parents on either side of my family that need a lot of my attention right now. But this group will always be family to me and an important part of my community. And when Sarah called me this afternoon, it's like, it's Sarah. I have to say yes. If I said I'll pray about it for 15 minutes. Let me check this out. But because I'm that's a boundary. You need to know where you set your boundaries. But this community is also a really special part of finding that deep foundation that we all need to get through this. So at this time, I just want to, open the floor for people to share things that they have found helpful, and also to ask any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was amazing. I'm going to stop the recording and take you off a spotlight so we can